What do you think about when you think about ice? Is it the stuff that keeps your drink cool on a hot summer afternoon? Or that special silky smoothness that comes to an ice rink after it's been zambonied? Or maybe it's the stuff that trips you up in January after a snowstorm in New York City. Those were all the things that I thought about when I thought about ice, until a trip to the Arctic completely upended my understanding of ice, of wilderness, and the amazing complexity of our planet. When you look out at sea ice, it looks vast, it looks forbidding, it looks empty. Yet there's so much more to understand about ice in the Arctic. It's far more than frozen water. This piece of ice demonstrates the point. In all those little nooks and crannies you can see, tunnels and channels form between ice crystals and among ice crystals. Things live in those channels. Lots of things live in those channels. In fact, scientists have documented over 1,000 species of plants and animals that live in, on, or under the ice, each exquisitely adapted to a particular place in the ice. You have algae that grows only on top of the ice. This stuff smells and tastes like watermelon, but unless you want to have a speed date with your toilet, I advise you not to eat it. There's algae that grows only under the ice, and in some cases, in these amazing curtains, although this is much less common now as ocean chemistry has changed. There are many other creatures that live in the ice, little tiny worms, snails, bacteria, and these plus the algae are harvested by this gorgeous Amphirusa. It's an amphipod, as well as copepods and other larger animals, which in turn supports larger species, including the polar cod, which is my personal favorite. This guy's blood chemistry resembles that of antifreeze, and it enables them to live in temperatures below zero. He's nestled into a little nook or cranny in the ice, protected from predators, and surrounded by dinner in the form of arthropods and copepods. What more could a fish ask for? Except maybe a female fish. Polar cod, in turn, is depended upon by a whole range of animals, including narwhal. The derivation of the word narwhal is amazing. In Old Norse, nar means corpse, wal means whale. Corpse, whale. And they named it that because when these animals are underwater, that grayish mottling makes them look like drowned sailors. That protuberance coming out of its head looks like a horn, but it's not. It's a tooth. And unlike our teeth, it has a whole range of neurons and receptors that allow it to determine what's in its environment. Scientists have debated for years, decades, centuries, what possible use could an animal have with an appendage like that? Some people think it stirs up the ocean bottom and causes fish to come up. Others think it's a way of measuring the thickness of ice so that they can find air quickly. This animal is just one example of many others that depend on polar cod. There are a suite of seals, that maybe half dozen of them, that rely on sea ice, either completely or partially for different stages of their life cycle. This harp seal is nursing its pup, and polar cod are very nutritious and important for these moms as they're pregnant and giving birth. Polar cod are kind of like the energy bar of the ocean, and they provide a lot of needed nutrition. Birds also feed on polar cod. These murres will sit on the ice, dive in, pick up fish, come back, give it to their young. The ice both provides food, but it also serves other functions in the Arctic. It's a platform from which animals can hunt for their prey. So this polar bear can roam around the ice looking for seals. It's much more efficient for him to walk on ice than it is to swim in the water. And that's why ice is important as a platform from which to feed. These walrus similarly feed from their ice platforms. They mate and breed and bear their young on ice. They eat bivalves and clams, similar organisms that occur along the ocean bottom in shallow water. So everyone in this room knows we are losing sea ice at a dramatic pace. This map is taken, this map shows the Earth as if you were sitting on top of it. So you have Russia here, Norway and Sweden, Iceland, Greenland, Canada, and the United States. The red line illustrates the sea ice minimum. That was the median of the sea ice minimum from 1979 to the year 2000. The white part shows the extent of sea ice minimum in 2012. So you can see it has shrunk very dramatically. It's not only shrinking in extent, but it's shrinking in depth. And the volume of sea ice has declined by almost 2/3 in the last 3 decades. So for the animals that rely on the ice, the seabirds, the seals, the polar bears, the future is not looking terribly good. As we lose ice, we start to lose species, and you get the picture. The Arctic Ocean will be devoid of summer sea ice within our lifetimes. And the even more depressing news is that even if we stopped emitting CO2 tomorrow, the warmth already in the system will continue to melt the ice. So now what do you think when you think of ice? Bummer, right? Hopeless, right? No, I am here to tell you there are things that we can and we must do to protect this incredible part of the planet. We need to protect key ecosystems from the damage by industrial activities like fishing, from oil and gas development, which not only involves major spills potentially, but also generates massive amounts of waste that's typically dumped over the side untreated, along with air pollution and water and noise pollution. Noise pollution in the Arctic is really a problem because the animals there find each other and communicate with sound, not with vision. A noisy ocean makes it that much harder for animals to communicate together. Shipping across the top of the Arctic shaves 5,000 miles off the trip from Asia to Europe. And we've already seen a huge growth in trans-Arctic shipping. Shipping can bring with it the risk of ship strikes against whales, invasive species, and of course, the chance for a major accident, which we are singularly ill-equipped to deal with. So what is it that we can do to help this region survive? There are 2 big things. The first is reducing CO2 emissions. And I say that because even though the warmth already in the system will continue to melt the ice, the lower the CO2, the slower the melting will happen. And time is everything for creatures that need to adapt to a tremendously changing environment. The second reason we need to curb CO2 emissions is that CO2 dissolves in seawater and creates carbonic acid. This phenomenon happens much more quickly in the Arctic than it does in almost any other part of the world, because CO2 dissolves more readily in cold water than it does in warm water. That's why your Coke is bubblier when it's cold than it is when it's warm. So reducing CO2 emissions is the critical first step. A second key step is protecting habitat diversity throughout the Arctic. In habitat diversity, there is hope. There are as many options as possible for creatures to adapt their life cycles to a new and changing Arctic. A couple of examples of these kinds of habitats. This is the Bering Strait, a 50-mile wide gap between the Pacific Ocean and the Arctic Ocean. Every spring and every fall, this place turns into an underwater Serengeti. Hundreds of thousands of marine mammals and birds funnel up through this gap to the Arctic to do their breeding and birthing thing. Then in the fall, they come right back down through to overwinter in the Pacific Ocean. This is the only place where they can get through. And it's a migration of global significance, and nobody knows about it. Take another place, Franz Josef Land off of Russia, an archipelago that forms a barrier between the Barents Sea and the Arctic Ocean. And the mixing and currents there keep the ice away from parts of the island archipelago. And open water is really important for species that spend their entire lives in the Arctic as opposed to migrating. Or the White Sea, where this benthos is just extraordinary. It looks like something we might see out here today. The White Sea has an incredible number of benthic habitats that are really spectacular. Or the waters between Greenland and Canada, Lancaster Sound, Disco Bay, the Northwater Polynya. It's a haven for a whole range of marine mammals, including beluga whales and narwhal, and as well as a lot of seabirds. So I want to say this again because it's important. The first thing we need to do is reduce CO2 emissions. But that's not enough. We have to help this region to the maximum extent we can maintain a diversity of habitats by protecting them from harmful industrial activities. By now, I hope that when you next encounter ice, perhaps in your drink this evening, you will think about the Arctic and think about the opportunity we have, this small window, to get in and protect key habitats, to maximize the opportunity for species to survive over time. This picture was taken a month ago. This is our fearless leader, Sylvia Earle. I tried to think about what was going through her mind when this picture was taken. And all I could think of was this joyful exuberance, urging us, exhorting us to do whatever we can to save this amazing part of the planet. Thank you.